Okay, Brandon is here for, I believe, the eighth Sales Operations Demystified podcast slash webinar episode. Thank you so much for joining.
Thanks for having me.
Every guest we have has a really diverse kind of entrance into sales operations. And stalking you in the last week or so, I see we have another kind of interesting approach or route into sales operations, which is going to be super interesting to go into. Before we do start chatting with Brandon, a bit of admin. Last week, apologies, we didn't actually have an episode. We had a sales operations manager from a large tech company. We weren't allowed to say the name because for legal reasons, but we actually got the time zones messed up. He was on the west coast of the US. We got the time zones messed up, so we couldn't make the time, but he is coming back on the 16th of May. So yeah, Brandon, super excited to have you on. We'll run for approximately 30 minutes. We have the standard questions that we'll run through. But there's also, I was reading one of your LinkedIn posts today, and so there's definitely going to be a wealth of knowledge, both for salespeople and sales operations people here, I feel, from what I was reading. But let's kick off actually with a little kind of introduction. You have some great companies on your CV, right? You have Qualtrics, you have Amazon, and right now it's Lucid Chart, right?
Yeah.
And your current job title is Head of Sales Operations.
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's technically revenue and account operations. We're still we've consolidated a lot of the duties between sales and CS, and so. But yeah, generally, like a bulk of our work is in sales operations.
And that's super interesting because a big theme that we've had from previous episodes is actually sales operations is really just part of this larger thing called revenue operations, but I'm sure we will touch on that. So as I was saying, interesting journey to sales operations. So can we start with that? How did you kind of get into sales ops? Could you please explain your journey?
Yeah, so I started as a finance major in college, graduated, and it was kind of a means to an end. I've talked about this before, but what I'm passionate about is solving problems, looking at operations, how to make them more efficient, and really doing analytics to drive data-driven decision making. Yeah. And finance was a really good means to an end there. And when I went to Concur Technologies, which was now part of the SAP family as well. One of the things that I really looked for in that role was one where I had kind of a seat at the table and could kind of check those boxes, not just I'm sitting in back office kind of being support. And I think that this actually has a lot of kind of application to sales ops. There tends to be in finance kind of two types of roles. Yeah. Those that are very back office and support. And basically the person that holds the purse strings and all you do is say, yes, you can use this money, and no, you can't. Or the real more strategic partner type role. And so that was one thing I've always looked for in my roles, especially in the finance side, was doing the due diligence to understand what type of finance organization is this. And so at Concur and then later at Amazon, that was very much the case. And so that was why I chose those roles. And then when I came, so I was very happy up in the Pacific Northwest. And one of my buddies from Amazon actually had moved down to this company called Qualtrics. And at the time I hadn't really heard of them. And it was just kind of, hey, I think you guys are doing really interesting stuff. My wife and I were in town just kind of on a vacation, a holiday, and went and visited the office. And as the story goes, found this interesting sales ops world. And he introduced my future boss. And as they say, the rest is history.
So when you say you found it, then you went to the office just to look around and you got introduced to the sales operations team.
Yeah, exactly.
Because your friend was in sales operations, or?
No, he was actually in partnerships or something like that.
Okay.
And they had an open role for kind of a leader in the sales ops team. And so connected me with the director over there, the senior director, and we just kind of hit it off and started talking. And the more I learned about sales ops, the more I realized it really checks all those boxes off for me. Of I get to leverage data to help drive decisions. I can dive into the operations to help companies be more impactful and efficient. And then also the thing I love about, and I've really fallen in love with in working in sales operations, is the psychological aspect of things.
Interesting, yeah.
Because many times you can go run the data and it says do A, B, and C, and it'll have such and such outcome. But there is this human element when you're working with salespeople, especially when you're working with things like their compensation. And you have to really think, how will someone react? Because your model that you built is based on, this underlying assumption that they're going to continue to operate in the same way they've been operating.
Mm-hmm.
But if you change the comp plan, like, all bets are off.
Yeah.
And so you have to really think about what will be the psychological impact of those things. And so we've seen a number of decisions that where the data's telling us to do one thing, and then we've had to kind of add upon this kind of almost like psychological analysis of
mm-hmm.
how will reps or managers react given certain changes. And a lot of times, there's this qualitative research element to it. So that was another thing that helped me really fall in love with kind of the sales operation side. And then one last point is, it's just fun to be at front of the house. Like, every company I've ever worked at, like, when you're on sales, you're really kind of driving the ship, whether directly or inadvertently. I think about my time at Qualtrics. We had a major impact on the product roadmap because, like, they want to know, product managers, product marketing wants to know what's selling. They want to know, what certain things are being received in the market. And so there's just a lot of fun being in the sales org because you have such a important role that impacts literally like every other organization in the company.
I think I have two really interesting points there. The first is, and we've had this before, how there's two, like, the qualitative data-driven analysis and that softer side. These are two very different skill sets, right? And a sales operations resource has to really manage those two, even though they're almost completely different things. That's super interesting. Hopefully we can talk more about that later. And second thing is, and this is really good actually, the communication link back from sales to product. I think a lot of companies are not good at doing that. And I, like, here at FCI, I don't think we're the best at doing that either. But it is so important, because how does the product know what's going to sell if the product team are not out there every day with customers getting rejected, right? They're like, that's really interesting. Like, is there anything that the product team did to get that data from the sales team, like, efficiently? Like, was there a regular meeting, or
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things we set up at Qualtrics, and it ended up being really, really helpful, is given that we were a surveying company, we launched a post-win-loss analysis to the customer, not the sales rep. Because oftentimes you find the sales rep is like, oh, this is why I lost. And then you actually go look at the feedback from the customer, and it's like, you lost because you had no clue why you lost.
Interesting. So for the benefit of the audience, Qualtrics was like a survey SaaS platform.
Exactly.
Right?
Yep.
So you're saying you would send a survey to the customer or to the salesperson post lost deal, or both?
Yeah, I mean, we had kind of sampling rules to where we'd send it to a certain percentage. We had, if it was like just a little add-on, we wouldn't send surveys. So we had all these rules, but yeah, we'd send a survey. And then we also had a process where certain deals that, had key criteria, like they were large deals, they were maybe a new product or something. We'd set up rules. It'd go into a queue that me and my team would review. And we basically say yes or no. And if it's no, it'd go through that kind of normal sales survey process. If yes, what we do is we actually contracted with a third-party entity that would go and do in-depth interviews with these people.
Oh, nice.
And it was like, our first vendor was really good, but then we switched vendors to actually, a local company, a group called Closed, CLOZD, and these guys were just super, super sharp. And the content that they were giving us was giving us a ton of insight into our sales process. Like, were we coming out on our pricing way too heavy? So a lot of really good sales training material, but then also a ton of really robust product capabilities that just wasn't there. That was really critical to them. Because that's the other thing too, is there's always this interesting, I would say, battle between sales and product.
Yeah.
To where, product often views sales as just a bunch of whiners. It's like, hey, just go sell the product.
Yeah.
And there's this kind of, and I think it's quite healthy, this a little bit friction per se. But when it's coming directly from the mouth of the customer, it's like product marketing's like, this is amazing. This is exactly what we need. And same with their product team. So that was one avenue that's been super helpful. And then the other thing too is, I'd say and this is something we're implementing here at Lucid, because we're still a little bit more in our infancy there, but just collecting feedback on like, what were key features that impacted this deal. And so, there's the bias of the rep, but I think genuinely, like, as long as we explain why we're collecting this data and that it's going to have major impacts on the product roadmap, then they'll be apt to try and be as honest and open as possible about, hey, this feature set wasn't there and this is why we lost the deal, or this was and why we won the deal. So egos and things like that.
That's super important, right? Because you have the egos of both teams. The product team's ego saying that my product's amazing. Sales team's ego says I'm really good at selling, and so these are almost a conflict, right? But if you have the customer saying actually your product's not so amazing here, or you don't have this feature, then the product team can like stomach that like much more effectively.
Yeah. And I think this is another area where sales ops can add a ton of value, is just acting as kind of this intermediary, because you think of the background and the profiles. You have sales reps, we all know kind of their backgrounds. And then you have like product, which will be, very analytical. Oftentimes, especially in a tech company, they're like ex-engineers or they have a computer science degree. And so a lot of times the friction is driven by just they communicate very differently, and we can act almost as translators of saying, look, here's a bunch of sales reps are saying this and they think it's like this huge fire, but let me actually translate it into kind of layman's terms. And maybe it's a translation, maybe it's like helping them kind of see through the way the sales reps are communicating. And so that's, I think, one critical skill set a sales rep can do, is making sure you have a strong relationship with your product marketing team, because we both rely, and sales relies upon, the product that they're building, and product relies upon sales to get good information on what to build. And, we can often act as that intermediary to ensure that it's like more of a virtuous cycle as opposed to, the opposite.
Yeah. I actually don't think we've spoken to anyone about that role, as the role of sales operations linking product and sales. So that's super interesting. We pull out a couple of quotes from each interview and put them on social media and design them really nicely. So I think we'll probably do one to do with that, with product and sales. Anyway, okay, so moving on, and we may have touched on this already. What do you think makes an awesome sales operations person?
That's a great question. And this was probably one that I'm probably most excited to answer. And I maybe I have a unique take on it, but let me give you a couple stories from my Amazon days that kind of as context for my answer.
Great.
So one of the things that was really ingrained in the Amazon culture was very rotational, to where I remember when I hit my 2-year mark, like my inbox just started getting flooded with directors saying, hey, I want to talk to you about a role on my team, man. I want to talk to you about a role on my team. And then like I talked to my director because I was like, hey, FYI, I'm talking to these teams. And he's like, oh no, I totally know. And this is the way, it's going to be very painful if we lose you, but I get it. And we want to do what's best for you. And ultimately kind of what's best for Amazon, because there's benefit in this kind of rotational, getting fresh set of eyes on things. And so then it was interesting, because then when I was really heavily involved in our MBA interviewing, because we had a pretty robust MBA program, post MBA program. Yeah. And I remember so at this point I was in finance and sitting in these interview committees. So we'd interview a bunch of people and then we'd sit and debrief about them. And I remember meeting one candidate and I'm like, this guy would be incredible on my team. Like he literally checks all the boxes. We'll just nail it out of the park. And then the guy next to me says, oh, he would be terrible on my team. Granted, still in finance, but the roles were very, very different. And I said, okay, yeah, let me understand your role. And I said, yeah, he actually would be not very good in this situation. And we ultimately declined on this individual because we're looking for someone that really can do it all. That, maybe isn't like so pigeonholed that they're going to be the specialist in this one area, but we can hire smart people that can rotate throughout the company. So that culture was really heavily ingrained upon me, and something that I was a big proponent of. And then the second piece, a story from there, I remember we had a candidate that we were interviewing for a specific position, not kind of anything rotational at that point. And I was like, look, this kid's really smart, super sharp, and it wasn't just me, it was pretty much everyone on the interviewing committee was like super sharp. We really like him, but we don't think this role is quite right for him. He doesn't have the right experience. And I think the ramp will just be, maybe too long than we need. And my director said, totally agree with everyone's assessment, but step back and think 6 months, 12 months from now, once this person's ramped, like how will they compare? And we all immediately had this kind of aha moment that's like, this kid will be a rock star. And so then once we had that kind of longer term potential view, we then stepped back and said, look, we can deal with the pain of a little bit longer ramp and, getting up to speed time in favor of, having someone that's going to really be that long-term all-star. And so we hired him and totally was. He was incredible. So I say that in that I think sometimes we make the mistake of overemphasizing prior experience, especially in sales ops. Like, hey, I have to have someone that's been selling or someone that has been in sales ops before. I mean, I look at my team and folks that I've hired into here in Qualtrics, and very, very few have ever done sales ops before. And it's not that that's a bias against sales ops people. It's that I'm really like, sales ops is kind of like the icing on the cake, that experience. And it's more, I'm looking for those core skill sets.
Which are?
To me, the core skill sets are like ability to deal with ambiguity, ability to just really execute. I mean, sales is a unique animal in that, like when you're in accounting, it's very simple. You have very clear deadlines. I have to file my financials with, our regulating body. I have taxes I have to file, or I pay a huge fine, etc. Whereas sales is sometimes, it's much more opportunity cost based, to where, okay, I want to redo this comp plan, or I want to do this analysis to, really refine our target market. If I don't do it today, like, it's not going to have a dramatic impact. Not everything's going to fall apart tomorrow. But there is an opportunity cost in that. Like, hey, we want to get moving on this now. And so it's really critical to have someone that can just execute and be able to go deliver results and drive towards and drive a project forward. So that's kind of second. Third, I would say, just generally a smart person, because a lot of, creativity and smarts, I think, because a lot of the problems we solve, there's like, maybe other Salesforce, LinkedIn, some of these other great sales shops have figured it out, but like, you've still got to like figure out the Lucid way or the Qualtrics way. And so having someone that's really smart and kind of knows how to dive in, look at either a process, look at a problem and solve is critical. And so those types of things I think are really good. One of the ways we actually look for this, we've built a case. One of our members of our team spent a ton of time, built this awesome like sales ops case that, we have them look at some numbers, ask them some questions, have them think through strategy. And it's really funny because a lot of the sales ops people, or people with sales ops experience, you can almost just see their like brain shut off, and they'll just start regurgitating like what they've done in past jobs, which, maybe it's the right answer, but that's not how I want someone to approach a problem. I want them constantly be engaging and thinking about like, okay, we did this at my prior job, but is that the right way to do it? Does that actually fit the Lucid or, whatever your company, insert company name here, model? So I would say those things are really what I'm looking for and then, sales ops experience is just a bonus. And the thing I will say is that experience is actually not that hard to go create and replicate. I could go hire someone tomorrow, give them like 30 days and say, go spend the next 30 days just interviewing every local sales company, understand how they think about this comp element, this thing and this thing and this thing. And they're going to get actually a much better understanding than someone that maybe even spent like 10 years at Salesforce. Because they just have one point of view. And so that's, I guess, the one recommendation for folks out there in sales ops right now is make sure that you're getting a really diverse exposure to different ways of doing things. That's when you can turn kind of your sales ops experience into a major, major asset. Because not only do you have, a really good understanding of what the market's doing, but also, hey, I've seen these in practice as well. And that's when it kind of flips from a nice to have to like actually really essential.
Yeah. And so then the next question is, do you think that sales experience is necessary for this role?
Yeah, I think, it doesn't hurt. It's kind of one of those things. I think it's the same answer I give with kind of sales ops experience. It just depends, if that's what you're going off, and like it's a secondary consideration in my mind. That said, I will say the one role where I think it's pretty critical is enablement. So enablement right now is kind of in our org. And I think there is some additional credibility when you've sold before. So we hired our head of enablement, and I actually brought her in. I was a close friend, and she had literally, I remember sitting her up in front of all of our sales reps and basically said, look, she carried $1 million quota, led a team, and you could just immediately see instant respect. And listen, I've seen a lot of enablement functions fall flat because you have someone sitting up there actually telling the right stuff and doing it very brilliantly, but because they just don't have that credibility, like sales reps just kind of turn off. And so I think that's one area where I think not everyone to be successful in enablement needs that, but I think your kind of core team needs to have some experience in sales to really be successful and kind of garner the credibility of the organization. So that's the only exception I'd say where it's helpful.
Sure. Just for context for the listeners, what size of sales organization and then size of sales operations organization are we working with?
Yeah, that's a great question. So our sales organization is like probably 100. We're probably looking, probably like the 120, 130 range right now.
Yeah.
But we're growing pretty exponentially. Like we'll probably double that in the next 12 to 18 months.
Oh, nice.
And so our ops team is also unique in that we have a lot housed within ops. Mm-hmm. So like one example is all of our comp plan creation and administration is done internally within our team, which sometimes sits in finance. And then a lot like our deal desk function as well sits in the team and some of those types of things. So with that context, our team's probably, we've got some summer interns starting, but and we have people starting, like 4 people starting the next like 2 weeks, but we're probably about 12 to 14 or something like that.
Do you think that's about like the sweet spot for the ratio between operations and actual reps is around 10%?
Yeah, the thing that's always tough, it's always apples and oranges. I remember, when we had someone at Qualtrics come in, our COO at the time was from Microsoft, and he just was like, your sales ops team is massive. It's way bigger. But then when we actually started sitting down and saying, let's talk about what is included in the sales ops team, we had our whole Salesforce development team and all these different things. Then you actually, when you talk about core sales ops, it gets to a much better and much more typical ratio to what you're used to.
Sure.
So that's kind of the thing that's a little tough to say, here's the right ratio, because it really depends on 2 things. One, like what's included in sales ops, and second, like what's included in your sales process. For example, we are investing heavily in a lot of our billing and kind of license allocation provisioning. But right now it's a pretty manual process. And so for the time being, that our deal desk, our order processing team is bigger than it should be until we get to a much more automated world. And so we've kind of solved that in the short term with headcount. Yeah. And then as we start to build in more and more automation, then we essentially don't grow that team. Hopefully that team stays flat for the next 5 years.
Yeah. And so that leads very nicely on to the next question is, what is the current tech stack you're using to manage this 120 person sales team?
Yeah. I try to stay as lean as possible. Nothing's worse than like tech stack bloat. And so we have obviously Salesforce, we're a Salesforce shop. Outreach.io is kind of our automation and cadence management tool. We do InsideSales.com, but that's predominantly just for our SDRs or inbound, kind of routing type stuff. We have, let me get all our tools here from a tech stack. LinkedIn Sales Navigator. I don't know if it is technically a technology, so I'll throw that in there. And then we have Discover.org for a lot of our like contact and prospecting data, lead data and stuff, data enrichment in that on the contact side. And then for account data, we actually just purchased DataFox to help enrich a lot of our firmographic data in Salesforce. And then let's see, another big tool that we use, we're big proponents of our own tool, is Lucidchart. Yeah. I think it's actually really, really essential for anyone in operations. Just really mapping out processes. I'm a big visual person, so it's been a tool that is literally went from, hey, this is interesting, to it's like essential and I use it on a daily basis. I think a funny story is we had a company meeting, last quarter, and they did an analysis internally of their largest Lucidchart users internally. And the number one was like a support rep. So obviously they're answering support calls, so they live in the product every day. The second highest user of Lucidchart was our SVP of sales.
Nice.
And so just because it's one of those tools where you can map out processes, I build my org out in it and kind of planning. All of our planning is done in that, and because it's just so impactful to be visual. So that's probably those tech stacks. And then there's some other ones we're evaluating, but those are kind of the big technologies we're using. Yeah. I guess, there is the question on what platform we use for online onboarding. The answer to that is we don't have a specific onboarding tool. We run that pretty much in-house, but we do use, it's Bridge. It's like an LMS type thing that we use for a lot of our kind of certification, those types of projects. Cool. So it supplements our onboarding process as well.
Thank you for that question, James. A shout out for Lucid Chart for myself, actually. Our sales manager was telling me this afternoon that he was using it to map out a process. And I massively think that if you want something to be reproduced over and over again, so if you're in operations and you want some other people to keep doing this thing, it has to be documented. And whether you do that we actually do all of our process documents in Google Docs, but then embedded into that, we also need diagrams, and we're either using like Google Slides, but Lucid Chart is significantly more powerful than that tool.
And it embeds really well into all that stuff, which is super helpful. The other thing too that we recently rolled out, which is, I guess I probably should include in our tech stack, is we have a Lucid Chart sales solution that has a bidirectional sync with Salesforce.
Nice.
So what's really been interesting, and it's been super helpful, especially on much of our strategic accounts, is you can go in and instead of going to an account page and seeing just a static list of contacts, you can basically bring it into your Lucid Chart, and you now have these contacts on a page. You drag it in, and you can create, whether it's an org, just a simple org chart, or we've got these templates that you follow to where you can essentially take any contact, put them, hey, this person's a detractor. These are people that I just found, but I need to categorize where they fit into the buying process and things like that. And it's been super beneficial. Our reps love working out of it. And their managers will come in and do like a pipeline review and immediately go to that. You can quickly see this deal's not going to close. You have 3 people on your chart. This is a massive company, and if you are talking to 3 people, you've got no chance of closing.
Yeah.
So and it really drives enablement and whatnot. So that's probably the other piece I'd add to our tech stack as well.
Shout out to Lucid Chart. Okay, so next question, and this might be a loaded one. Your favorite tech tool?
This is probably a nod of the hat back to my old finance days. Is I just live and breathe in Excel, and it's just such an incredible platform.
Back to basics.
So it's just great for like most of the ad hoc analysis I'm doing. That said, like for kind of sustainable, repeatable dashboarding, like it's not a great tool for that. Yeah. So I understand that, but just for me personally, that's one that I spend a lot of time in, of just doing ad hoc, like, hey, how is this looking, and things like that. So, I got to say Excel. And then there's a whole bunch of other tools. Like I love Tableau. We're Tableau shop as well for, a lot of the big.
That's the one tool.
Yeah.
I agree with the Excel thing. It's super easy, and quick, but I always have the challenge of wanting to sync Excel with other applications. And I don't think I've ever found like a solution that does that reliably or that's cheap enough.
No, we do use Sheets, which I kind of say Sheets and Excel interchangeably, because Sheets, we do have some stuff that allows you to do kind of some automated data stuff.
Awesome. Okay, moving on. How do you, as a sales operations team, deal with data quality in Salesforce, and how does who's responsible for that in Lucid Chart? Is that I know you have a big sales ops team, but is it also like you said the Salesforce dev team? Like who deals with that, and how do you deal with that?
Yeah. It's really a team effort here. And I think in my experience, that's kind of the best way to go. First and foremost, like our responsibilities, we're looking for software or databases that can help. So as I mentioned, we just purchased DataFox. That we're already seeing some great uplifts in kind of our data quality there around, firmographic data, industry, it's employee counts, things like that. It's same with DiscoverWorks. So making sure you have a good technology provider to kind of be the underpinning and the foundation, and then having a robust process to kind of almost like crowdsource data, the data cleansing, I would say. So right now our reps, if they, in their conversations with whether it's SDRs to the closers, if they're in a conversation with one of their accounts and find out, hey, you know what, this account actually purchased this account, they have a process, they can submit a case, we review it, and then make the adjustments there. So I think that's really the only way to do it. I'm sure there's it also depends on your market. If you're purely focused in like the global 2000, you can go buy software and pretty much be good. Problem is we work in that all the way down to like the smallest of small SMB clients. And so when you start getting into mid-market SMB, there's just not a solution that's really great unless you're in a really niche market, but we're really in everything. And so the best way to do that is to crowdsource. One of the other issues that we're running into is we recently expanded to Europe and opened an Amsterdam office. And like our European data set is like needs some work. And so and we only have a few feet on the ground. And so it's been a bit of a struggle because we want to create all these patches and territories for the reps, and we have less than ideal data. And so that's kind of a struggle that we're currently working through and trying to figure out, do we need to look at a separate data provider in some of the European markets, especially as we think about Australia and New Zealand as well, and the rest of the APAC region. What do we do there, and how do we? Because we really can't crowdsource at that point. Because when we started, we didn't have any boots on the ground. We now do, and so it's quickly getting better. But that's generally how we've approached it.
Didn't decide to come to London.
We actually came to London.
Okay.
We loved London. It just didn't, from a cost perspective, didn't make sense for us.
Agreed.
Our sell is very. We have a very inside sales motion. And so we don't have as much of a need to like be at the beck and call of our customers and just be on site in a minute. If you're, highly sophisticated, you do like 6-month implementations, totally makes sense to be in London because there's a major install base there. But that's why we chose Amsterdam.
Biggest challenge with the role and how you overcome it.
Yeah. And I don't know, maybe this is unique. We kind of talked about, my career's been in high growth tech. And so this may not apply to other industries, but it's really weighting prioritization, I would say. I have at any given time, myself and my team included, there's 100 great projects, good projects we could be doing. How do we find the great projects, the areas that we're going to move the needle the most? And so that's probably the most difficult and the most exciting thing I think about being on the team here and being kind of in the industry is there's never a lack of, you're never deciding, hey, this is not very value add and this is very value add. It's like, this is very value add, this is very value add. Which one do I do?
So do you have a framework for this prioritization or a process that you go through in order to make sure you're working on the right stuff?
Yeah, for sure. So one of the things we've set up here on our team is like really looking at 2 of them are more quantitative, so metrics, and then 2 kind of just general goals of focusing on. And as we do quarterly, we call it OKRs. There's a bunch of research. It's, I think, generated originally a Google practice, the OKRs. But when we set our goals on a quarterly basis, we kind of look at these kind of 4 levers that we want to be influencing. One is, our top line sales number, ensuring that we're doing a project that will help build and increase our top line sales. We have aggressive growth targets and we need to make sure we're helping hit that. Second is average bookings per rep, and looking at that and making sure we're not just hitting our, that metric number 1 by throwing a bunch of bodies at it, but instead we're actually improving efficiency, making sure our reps are being more and more productive and we're getting more ROI for each rep. And then inherent in that is like, this kind of, in parentheses, holistically doing that, because I've seen issues where, the average is going up, but it's really like the richer are getting richer and the poor are getting poorer. Like that's not best in my mind, but that everyone, the rising tide, raises all the ships or whatever, however the saying goes. And then the third and fourth, the qualitative ones are, providing better visibility and transparency, both upward and downward, of just making sure our executive leadership team knows what we're doing and how we're being successful. And kind of what our strategy is going forward. And then the fourth is, just really creating a robust and vibrant culture on the sales floor.
Nice.
And I think that, sometimes it sounds kind of weird that sales ops has that as a goal, but I think, with enablement, with compensation, like those are 2 massive levers you can pull to really drive the culture. And then we work really, really closely with all our sales leaders. And so we partner with them on a regular basis. And so I think that we have a major ability to impact the kind of culture on the sales floor.
I'm not sure that's been mentioned before, but I think that's super important. Having the group of people you're working with every day, especially sales team, really engaged with what they're doing. And I don't think we've had that before as a sales operation being responsible for that. So I think that's super interesting. We have one question here. I think this has already been answered. A recommended sales engagement platform. You mentioned you're using Outreach, right?
Yep. Yeah, we use Outreach. I mean, we've looked at Outreach, Sales Loft, Inside Sales has kind of they're building some stuff out, and right now, we're really happy with Outreach. And the issue that you run into with a lot of these is we've built so much in and around Outreach that, for us to, I mean, that was kind of, I don't even know, I wasn't here when the original purchase was made. So, if someone really wants to get me to switch, they've got to really convince me that it's their platform is, heads and shoulders above Outreach, because the switching costs is going to be really high.
That's the best thing for like SaaS, for SaaS stickiness, right? It's the customization of the tool, increasing that barrier to leave. The same with Salesforce, right?
Exactly.
Interesting. Okay, cool. Do you have one, we just spoke about 4 metrics that you kind of look at, right? But is there one that you could, that if you had to use one metric to judge the sales team, which one would that be?
For me, it'd be, average bookings per rep. I think that's, if you wanted to judge the health of a sales org, because you might be hitting your numbers. I've seen sales orgs where, you're hitting your numbers, but you have 1 or 2 people that are hitting really, really big deals while the core is struggling. Like, that's just delaying the disaster. There is an underlying problem that's going to come out at some point. And so looking at, making sure how, what are the percentage of reps that are hitting quota, and, average bookings per rep, or like they kind of go hand in hand, or 2 metrics, 1 to 2 metrics that I.
But then you did say there's also the other dimension of that you need to look at, which is almost, what's the term, the range of between, because as you said, there could be 2 players killing it and then the rest not. So awesome. Okay, so we come to the end. The final question is about somebody that you know or that you worked with that's kind of inspired you or taught you a lot about sales operations. Who are they? How do they do that, and where do they work?
Yeah, so there's, I would say, 2 people. I know I'm supposed to do 1, but I'm going to break the rule, give you 2. The first one was a guy named Austin Bankhead. I can't remember the name of the company he's at now, but he was the senior director that hired me at Qualtrics. Guy's super sharp, kind of the same background. Like, he had a background in marketing and management consulting. But just had that ability and was really sharp, and just taught me a lot about generally, what we should be looking at and how to look at a process and analyze it. And then the second individual, I would say, his name is Spencer Dent. He's actually one of the founders of that closed company I talked about. I essentially was his backfill at Qualtrics. He moved in to kind of set up a demand gen function there. And so he was great because, he had been doing my role when I moved over there, and he stayed in the sales industry and is just super sharp, has just really, really good, he's smart. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. Going back to the original conversation, like, he's a guy that you can throw a problem at, and whether he has context or not, or, even experience, like, he can think through the problem and give you a good recommendation.
Fantastic. Okay. That was a pretty fast journey, wasn't it? I think that was probably the most words spoken in one of our podcasts. But super, super interesting. Like, I really like you had a background in finance. So you're clearly very operational and super smart. And I think there was a lot of value added to the audience there. We're going to drag out 2 quotes and we'll be posting them. I really like the part about how sales operations has the soft side, but also the super analytical side. I think that's super awesome. If anybody has any questions, they have to be fast on the chat. Brandon, thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, of course. And, feel free to, I'm on LinkedIn. You can connect, shoot me a message. I love learning more about other people's problems, and happy to share anything we've learned, and would love to learn from others as well. So
Brandon Bussey on LinkedIn, and also a massive shout out to Lucid Chart. I didn't actually connect the applications of the product with the kind of sales mapping that you discussed. So I think that's super awesome. Sweet.
Cool. Yeah.
Thank you, Brandon.
Great. All right. Thank you. Have a good one.